Good morning, Rabbi Sai. We have arrived at Hilchos Purim, Siman Tov Reish Pei Hey. The first Siman is entitled Seder Arba Parshiyos, the order of the four Parshiyos. A quick introduction to this Siman. Mishnah Berurah tells us that Chazal instituted that four special Parshiyos should be read at this time of year around Rosh Chodesh Adar up until Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And these four special Parshiyos are to remind us about four particular things. The first one is Parshas Shkolim. It reminds us of the mitzvah which there was each year to give a machtis hashekel to the Beis Hamikdash for bringing the korbanos. The machtis hashekel had to be brought during Chodesh Adar so that people could use, so that the new Shkolim could be used to bring korbanos in Chodesh Nisan. The announcement to begin bringing the Shkolim was on Rosh Chodesh Adar. So we also make a zecher to this by reading Parshas Shkolim. The second parsha is Parshas Zocher, which is to remind us of the episode with Amalek. The third one is Parshas Paro, which is all about becoming toher from Tumas Meis. Since at this time of year Pesach is coming up, and were the Beis Hamikdash to be standing, we would have to purify ourselves to be able to bring Pesach. As a zecher to this, we read the Parshas Paro to also daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we should soon be able to actually do this procedure in practice. And finally, the fourth parsha is Parshas HaChodesh, which contains the halachas of Korban Pesach, which is suitable for that time of year, coming up to Chodesh Nisan and Pesach. And now coming to the text of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch tells us, Rosh Chodesh Adar hasomuch leNisan. The Rosh Chodesh of the Adar, which is close to Nisan. In other words, as we know, like in this year, sometimes there's two Adars. So there's an Adar which is not close to Nisan, and there's an Adar which is close to Nisan, the second Adar. So the Rosh Chodesh of the Adar close to Nisan, i.e. the second Adar, Shechol li is b'Shabbos, when that Rosh Chodesh falls on a Shabbos. So then, Korin Parshas Shkolim. On that Shabbos, we read Parshas Shkolim. What is the Parsha of Shkolim? Shehi Kisisa. It's the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, the first few psukim, going up until the pasuk Adva Asisa Kir Nechoshes, which is the start of a new Parsha. It's up till that Parsha and not including. That is the Parshas Shkolim. Umaftir Vayichros Yehoyada. There's also a special Haftorah which goes together with it, which begins with the words Vayichros Yehoyada. This Haftorah is suitable for Parshas Shkolim because it discusses Nedavos being given to the Bedek Habayis, being given to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. The Haftorah is this Haftorah, the Haftorah of Shkolim Vayichros Yehoyada, which speaks about giving Nedavos to the Bedek Habayis. The Haftorah is not, even though the case described by Shulchan Aruch is a case where it's also Rosh Chodesh, it was Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Parshas Shkolim. The Haftorah is the Haftorah of Parshas Shkolim. Even though you might say to me that the Haftorah of Rosh Chodesh is Todir, and we have a rule, Todir, Rishe'enu, Todir, Todir Kodim, something which is a mitzvah which comes more frequently, normally takes precedence, so you might say to yourself that the Haftorah of Rosh Chodesh is more frequent, it should take precedence to the Haftorah of Parshas Shkolim. No, it's not like that, because we always read the Haftorah which is connected to the final Torah reading. And the final Torah reading over here, out of all the various different Torah which I read from, is Parshas Shkolim. And therefore, the Haftorah is also the Haftorah of Parshas Shkolim. Mishnah Berurah notes a few general points relating to Arba Parshiyos in general. First of all, we've learned over here that the Arba Parshiyos are to be read in the Adar which is next to Nisan, i.e. the second Adar. If some mistake were to happen and a community were to read the Arba Parshiyos in the first Adar instead of in the second Adar, Mishnah Berurah brings some debate about it. He mentions that the Beis Yosef implies that they do not need to be read again, but his conclusion is, cites from the Darkei Moshe and the Eli Rabbah, that no, they have to be read again in the second Adar. Although Mishnah Berurah quotes the Beis Yosef as implying that you don't need to read them again, even the bottom line is that even for Sfardim they should be read again, even though they would generally follow the psukim of the Beis Yosef, because the Beis Yosef himself, in a later work called Bedek Habayis, where he makes annotations and changes to some of his earlier conclusions, actually concludes openly, like the other poskim, that when the Parshiyos were read in the first Adar, they need to be repeated again in the second Adar. So the mitzvah is only in the second Adar. If they were done in the first Adar, they have to be repeated. Couple of other points. If somehow or other these Parshiyos were forgotten, the correct Shabbos for reading Parshas Shkalim came along, and somehow or other it wasn't read, there is no tashlumin. The mitzvah is lost. It's done. Lost. It's lost. There's nothing more to do about it. If, however, that means to say, if Shabbos has passed and you haven't read it, but if, however, they didn't read it as part of the regular Torah reading, they just read the parsha, they read the parsha in Rosh Chodesh, but they forgot about Parshas Shkalim, but it's still Shabbos, then we can still fix up the situation. The Sefer Torah should be taken out, Parshas Shkalim should be read with a bracha before and after, and the Haftorah of Parshas Shkalim should also be read, but without a bracha, since we've already read a Haftorah in connection with the previous Torah reading.
Should this be done by Mincha or just Stam?
It could be done theoretically at any time. Mincha's a good time because people are there, but theoretically it could be done any time. Actually, the case described in the Mishnah Berurah is more where they're still in Shacharis Musaf, but they've finished the Kriyas Torah, and then suddenly they remember that they didn't do Parshas Shkalim. Coming back to the text of the Shulchan Aruch now, so now Shulchan Aruch looks a little more closely at the Seder which is to be followed. Don't forget the case we're describing here is it's also Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, so there's actually 3 Kriyas. There's Parshas HaShavua, there's Rosh Chodesh, and there's Parshas Shkalim. So says the Shulchan Aruch, we take out 3 Sifrei Torah from the Aron Kodesh, Be'echad Koreh Parshas HaShavua. In the first one reads from the Parshas HaShavua, one reads 6 aliyahs from that first Sefer Torah, at least. If you want to add, you can add, like we can always add aliyahs on any Shabbos, but at least you have to read 6 from the first one. Ubasheni shal Rosh Chodesh, from the second Sefer Torah you read the Kriya of Rosh Chodesh. Then you take a third Sefer Torah, you put the third Sefer Torah next to the second one and you say Kaddish. And then, Ubashlishi, in the third Sefer Torah, Koreh Mafte Parshas Shkalim. You read the final Kriya, which is Parshas Shkalim. Just a word about the Kaddish. We said that the Kaddish is in between the second Sefer and the third Sefer. According to the minhag of the Ashkenazim, there's no further Kaddish after that. There's only one Kaddish said in connection with Kriyas HaTorah, and in this case it would be after the second Sefer Torah. But according to the minhag of the Sfardim, there are actually 2 Kaddishim on this occasion, one after the second Sefer Torah and one after the third Sefer Torah. Because according to the minhag of the Sfardim, Kaddish is said basically after every Kriya, provided that the 7 aliyahs, the 7 obligatory aliyahs, have been completed. So there's no Kaddish in between the first Sefer Torah and the second Sefer Torah, because the first Sefer you only read 6 aliyahs, so the 7 aliyahs have not yet been completed. So after the second one, and according to the Sfardish minhag, also after the third one. And indeed, it goes even a little further. If they would add Hisofos into the first Kriya, then they would have actually already completed the 7 aliyahs, the 7 obligatory aliyahs, and then there would be Kaddish after the first Sefer Torah too, all according to their minhag. According to the minhag of the Ashkenazim, there's always only one Kaddish, which on this occasion is after the second Sefer Torah. The Mishnah discusses a very common and easy mistake which could happen over here. What happens if, when we come to the second Sefer Torah, mistakenly, they took the Sefer Torah which was meant to be for Parshas Shkalim, already made the bracha, and we've started to read. So instead of reading from the second Sefer, the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh, we start to read the Parsha of Shkalim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, okay, what's done is done, you continue to read, you're yet to with the reading of Parshas Shkalim that way, even though the order's been changed from the ideal order. The third Sefer Torah is then the Sefer Torah of Rosh Chodesh, and not only that, but in fact also the Haftorah has to also be changed, and the Haftorah which would be read would be the Haftorah of Rosh Chodesh, because we've learned the rule is Haftorah is also the Haftorah which is connected to the final Kriya. See space. The Shabbos Shniel, the coming Shabbos, Motzin Shnei Sfarim, we take out 2 Sifrei Torah. Be'echad Koreh Parshas HaShavua. In the first Sefer, one reads from the Parshas HaShavua. Ubasheni. Then you take a second Sefer Torah, you put it next to the first one on the bimah, and you say Kaddish. Koreh Zachares Hasha Asalecha Amalek, and you read the Parsha of Zachares Hasha Asalecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Umaftir, and then we read for the Haftarah a Parsha from Sefer Shmuel. Pakadati Esasha Asa Amalek, when Hashem says, I remember that which Amalek have done. And the story continues to discuss the battle of Shaul with Amalek. Mishnah Berurah mentions various minhagim about where exactly this Haftarah should begin. Shulchan Aruch describes it as beginning with the words Pakadati Esasha Asa Amalek. Some have the minhag, that's how it's recorded in the Rambam. The Lavush mentions that the Haftarah begins one pasuk earlier with the pasuk which begins Vayomer Shmuel. On a practical level, the minhag of the Ashkenazim is to start with the words, with the later pasuk, Pokadati Asasha Asa Amalek, but the Sfaradim do begin one pasuk earlier, Vayomer Shmuel. Seif Gimel. B'Shabbos Shlishis. Following through this same order, now we come to arrive at the third Shabbos, Shu Tes Vav Ba'adar, which is now the 15th of Adar, because Rosh Chodesh was on a Shabbos in the case being described. So 2 weeks later, Shabbos is the 15th of Adar, Mafsikim. Then there is a break, no special Kriya on that Shabbos. Of Shabbos Revi'is, on the fourth Shabbos, Shu Chaf Beis La'adar, which is now the 22nd of Adar, Moitzin Shnei Sfarim. We take out two Sifrei Torah, by Echad Keri Parshas HaShavua. One of them we read the Parshas HaShavua. Ubasheni, we take out a second Sefer Torah, once again, put it next to the first one, we say Kaddish, and then Keri Parshas Porah, one reads Parshas Porah, which is in Parshas Chukas, from the beginning of the Parsha, up until the words Titma Ad HaErev. Umaftir, V'zarakti Aleichem Maim Taharim, and then we read from the Novi Yechezkel, the Parsha, which starts with the Pasuk, I will sprinkle upon you Tahir waters. Ba'ayin le'eu, and then says that as the Ramah, you should look earlier, Simon Kuf Lamed Zayin Seif Hey, and Simon Kuf Lamed Zayin Seif Hey. Over there, the Shulchan Aruch discusses what happens if only part of the Parshas Porah was read. And the bottom line is that there are parts of Parshas Porah which are Ma'akiv, which is actually the later part of the Parasha, where the halachas of Tumah and Tara are described, and the Tara process of somebody who became Tomei, that part of it is Ma'akiv. But the earlier part, which describes how the Porah is taken and burnt, is not absolutely Ma'akiv, and if you skipped out a Pasuk or something over there, you would still be Yotze. Seif Dalet. B'Shabbos Chamishi, now on the fifth Shabbos, Shu Chavtes Ba'adar, which is now the 29th of Adar, Erev Rosh Chodesh, Moitzin Shnei Sfarim. One takes out two Sfarim. Ba'echad, the first one, Keri Parshas HaShavua, and then Vasheni, once again, a second Sefer put next to the first one, Kaddish is said, and then you read HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem from Parshas Boy, the portion which begins HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. This Chodesh is for you the first Chodesh. Umaftir, and then one reads a Haftarah which begins with the words Borishon Be'echad LaChodesh, which discusses the avodah and the service to the Beit HaMikdash that's going to be done by the Nasi on Rosh Chodesh Nisan and some future time, La'osid Love, after Moshiach comes. The Shulchan Aruch mentions this pasuk Barishon Be'echad LaChodesh. That's the actual pasuk which the minhag of the Sfaradim is to begin with that pasuk. Our minhag, the Ashkenazim, is to begin a little earlier from a pasuk which begins with the words Kol Ha'am Ha'aretz. The Shulchan Aruch has described a case where the Parshas HaChodesh did not fall together with Rosh Chodesh, but it does sometimes happen that Parshas HaChodesh can actually fall, actually read on Rosh Chodesh, when Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls on the Shabbos. And then a similar Seder is followed to the Seder which was described in Seif Aleph when Rosh Chodesh Adar was on the Shabbos. Again, we have three Sifrei Torah. The first one is the Parshas HaShavua, the second one is the Kriya of Rosh Chodesh, and the final one is the Kriya of Parshas HaChodesh, and the Haftarah which is read is the Haftarah of Parshas HaChodesh. And now we're moving on to Seif Hey. Chal Rosh Chodesh Adar HaSamuch LeNisan Toich Yemei HaShavua. If we'll change the case a little bit, the Rosh Chodesh Adar of the second Adar fell during the week. On Shabbos, it fell on a weekday. But I feel about Erev Shabbos, even if it's at the end of the week and it's on an Erev Shabbos, don't think to yourself that Parshas Shkolim will be read just close to that Rosh Chodesh on the next day. Let's say Rosh Chodesh was on Friday, so maybe you'll read the Parshas Shkolim just the following day on Shabbos. No. Makdimin Likros Parshas Shkolim b'Shabbos Shelafonov. Parshas Shkolim will always be the Shabbos before the Rosh Chodesh, unless Rosh Chodesh actually fell on Shabbos, then it will be always before. And then, following this... On or before, yeah. Umafsikin Bashnim. And then, the second Shabbos we have a break. There's no special Kriya on the second Shabbos. Kadesh Dei Parshas Zocher b'Shabbos Hasmucha LePurim Milafonel, so that Parshas Zocher will fall out the Shabbos just before Purim. Ve'imchal Purim be'erev Shabbos. And likewise, when Purim falls on Erev Shabbos, Makdimim Likris Parshas Zocher b'Shabbos Shelafonov. Parshas Zocher is the Shabbos before. Parshas Zocher always needs to be before Purim. It cannot be after it, even if it's just close to it on the following day. That's not good enough. It needs to be before Purim. And now, there's no Mishnah Berurah here, so we'll move straight on to Seif Vav. HaYomim she'roi likbar b'hem Rosh Chodesh Adar. The days on which Rosh Chodesh Adar, i.e. Aleph Adar, the first day of Adar, not the Lamed Shvat, Aleph Adar, The days on which this Rosh Chodesh can fall are the Siman, Zion, Beis, Daled, Vav. The 7th day of the week, Shabbos; Beis, the 2nd day of the week, Monday; Daled, the 4th day of the week, Wednesday; and Vav, the 6th day of the week, Friday. So those are the days when Rosh Chodesh can fall. And then the Siman, the Shabbos HaHafsaka, if you want to have a way of remembering the Seder of how these parshas will be read and when there will be a break between Parshiyos, then you have the following Siman. One Siman, Zion Tez Vav. That's one option. The second option is Beis Vav. The third option is Daled Daled. And the fourth option is Vav Beis Yud Vav. And now the Shulchan Aruch will explain to us what these simonim actually tell us. Kolon. And we'll go back over them Keseder. Kishachal Rosh Chodesh b'Shabbos. The first siman tells us about a situation when Rosh Chodesh fell on Shabbos. So then, Mafsikin, the Shabbos where there will be a break, is B'Tes Vav Boy, on the 15th of the month, which will be in between Parshas Zohar and Parshas Paro. The siman to that is Zion Tes Vav. The first letter tells us the day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, Zion. Rosh Chodesh Adar fell on a Shabbos. So then the break will be on Tes Vav, the final two letters of the mnemonic. It will be on the 15th. So that's the first option. Ukeshechal b'Yom Beis, when Aleph Adar falls on a Monday like it does this year. So then, Mafsikin b'Vav Boy, there'll be a break on the 6th of Adar, in between Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Zohar. The siman is Beis Vav. When Rosh Chodesh falls on a Monday, then Vav, there'll be a break on the 6th of the month. Ukeshechal b'Yom Daled, when Rosh Chodesh falls on a Wednesday, so then Mafsikin b'Daled Boy. There'll be a break on the 4th of the month, once again between Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Zohar. The siman is Daled Daled. Rosh Chodesh fell on Daled, on a Wednesday, then Daled, there'll be a break on Daled, the 4th of the month. Ukeshechal b'Yom Vav. And finally, when Rosh Chodesh falls on a Friday, Mafsikin b'Shtei Shabbosis, then there are two breaks. Beis Boy, the first break will be on the 2nd of the month, in between Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Zohar. Yud Vav Boy, and on the 16th of the month, in between Parshas Zohar and Parshas Paro. The siman is Vav Beis Yud Vav, the Vav telling us when Rosh Chodesh fell on a Friday. So then Beis, there's a break on the 2nd of the month, and Yud Vav, there's a break on the 16th of the month.
The siman must be very old because it's Vav Beis Yud Vav instead of Vav Beis Tes Zion.
Yeah, you do sometimes find in earlier Makoros that they were happy with using Yud Vav as a number. Yeah, it's true. Okay, Siv Zayin. Yesh Omrim. Some authorities say she Parshas Zohar or Parshas Paro Aduma, that these two of the four Parshas, Parshas Zohar and Parshas Paro, Chayovim Lekorom Midoraisa. They have to be read Min HaTorah. It is a Min HaTorah and biblical chiyuv to read these particular Parshas. Where's this sort of hinted at in the Torah? Where do we find a source for this in the Torah? The Mishmur explains that Parshas Zohar, the words Zohar Eis Asher Asa, remember, is explained by the Gemara to mean more than what we would just think of remembering. Remember it in your heart, remember it in your mind. The Gemara actually makes a drasha to tell us that Zohar means A, verbally, and B, that it should be done mitoich a true sefer, mitoich a sefer Torah. That is Parshas Zohar. Parshas Paro is a little more tricky. The Poskim look for some source for the opinion who holds that Parshas Paro is Midoraisa. We don't find any clear mention of this anywhere in the Gemara. The Aruch Shulchan suggests that we'll find the words Chukas Olam mentioned twice in the psukim of Parshas Paro. The first one, he says, tells us that the basic halachas of Parshas Paro, in essence, apply always, even where the Beis HaMikdash is not standing. Theoretically, were we to have the Efer Paro still with us today, we could do the procedure and we could become Tahor. And indeed, we do find records in the Gemara of people who had Efer Paro and used it long after the Churban Habayis. It's not in any way, in essence, it's not connected to the Beis HaMikdash being standing, provided that you have the Efer Paro available.
And work on Pesach.
I'm not talking about Korban Pesach, I'm just talking about the actual...
What did they do with the Efer Paro?
Became tar for various things. No, we're not talking about Korban Pesach. Various things they wanted to be tar for for eating truma, for no, I think it was more for trumas and maestros and things like that. It wasn't not connected to Korban Pesach. So that's the first chukas olam. The second chukas olam, we already know that from the first one that the halachas of para apply, in essence, apply always. So the second one tells us that we should remember it always by reading it once a year. That's one possible suggestion. Other places can have different approaches. And indeed, the Mishnah mentions that there are many poskim who disagree with this ruling of the Shulchan Aruch and say that Parshas Para is not Doraisa, Parshas Para is the Rabbanah. So it's a question. Now there are obviously ramifications of Parshiyos being Doraisa. What's it important for us besides the one that Shulchan Aruch himself is going to mention in a minute? Additionally, the Mishnah points out that we have a famous discussion whether mitzvah is tzrichas kavana. Is it absolutely le'ikuva for a person to be aware when he does a mitzvah action that with this action I want now to be yotzei my chiyuv? The bottom line is that certainly, but in the Raisas, one should, in the Raisa mitzvah, one should have this intent in mind, and therefore, since these mitzvahs are Doraisa, one should have the intent. We need mitzvah strichas kavana, and the Mishnah says that the truth is, even if Parshas Paro, which might well only be Drabanon, it's still good to be particular. You don't lose anything, and it's not a hard thing. Another possible ramification is calling up a cotton for an aliyah. In principle, according to basic halacha, a cotton may be called up for maftir, and do the haftarah. Even a cotton is under bar mitzvah may be called up for maftir. But for these two, Parshas Zachar and Parshas Para, he should not be called. And then there's another nafkamina which the Shulchan Aruch tells us now. Lefichach, therefore, having said that these parshas are midoraisa b'nei hayeshuvim she'en lahem minyan, people who are in a place where they do not have a minyan, tzrichim lovei lemokim sheyesh minyan b'shabbosis halalu, should come to a place where there is a minyan on these shabbosis kedei lishmaya parshas elu, in order to hear these parshas which are doraisa. Now, Mishnah questions whether even if it's true to say that the reading of Parshas Zachar and Parshas Para is a mitzvah deiraisa, he says he doesn't see any clear source which would tell us that the reading of it amongst a tzibur, along with a tzibur, is deiraisa. Who says that you need a tzibur mideiraisa? So the Mishnah says that in fact Shulchan Aruch's ruling does not mean to say that you need the tzibur mideiraisa, but it means to say that since it is a deiraisa mitzvah in essence, Chazal fixed that it ought to be done in such and such a format, even though maybe some of the details like having a tzibur is not deiraisa, but that is how Chazal fixed how the mitzvah should be done, and therefore it should be treated with the utmost severity and importance, and one should make the effort to be together with a minyan as far as possible. And if it's not possible to come, then people who are on their own and they're not together with a minyan should at very least make the effort to read it correctly, properly, along with the Neginos, and the Mishbura adds from within a Sefer Torah as well. A couple of other points about Parshas Zachar. The Mishbura mentions that we have this word Zecher Amalek towards the end of the Parsha, where there's some doubt whether the exact correct reading is Zecher or Zecher, and therefore one should read both. Later points can discuss how exactly this should be done, whether it should be done by reading over the entire pasuk, or whether it should be done by simply repeating that phrase, Timche Zecher Amalek. Many poskim seem to say that it's perfectly sufficient to read over that phrase again, although they do say that just to repeat the word is not recommended. Whether ladies are chayav to hear Parshas Zachar is also a big question, but the bottom line is that ideally, preferably, they should make a point of hearing it, because there are poskim who hold that they too are obligated in this mitzvah. A couple of general points about the Arba Parshiyos. We don't say Keil Mali Rachmi on these Shabboses. We do say Tidkoscha at Mincha, and there are various minhagim about whether Av HaRachamim is said, but the conclusion of the Mishnah Berurah is that Av HaRachamim is not said. Okay, we arrived at the end of this sermon, we'll stop here.